Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of In the Pages. I'm Bob Goulder, a contributing editor with Tax Notes. Our featured article examines a very timely issue, the material costs to taxpayers of an improperly funded IRS. It appears in Tax Notes Federal, and it's titled The Pragmatic Realities of an Underfunded IRS. The authors are William VanDenburgh, Philip Harmelink, and Joshua Foster. And we're delighted to have two of the authors with us for today's discussion. They are Professor William VanDenburgh with the College of Charleston and Professor Philip Harmelink with the University of New Orleans. Gentlemen, welcome to In the Pages.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Your article was written before President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. However, we'd be remiss if we failed to mention one of the act's key provisions. It calls for increased IRS funding, and quite a bit of it. So, Philip, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on the additional funding in the legislation? Will it be enough to fix some of the problems discussed in your article?
Well, I think it's very important to have a large amount of money for enforcement because, it will pay off in the long run. It may help reduce the tax gap and, could bring in billions of dollars if they would have better enforcement.
William, your thoughts?
Well, as you said, the act was passed, giving us $80 billion more in mandated funding, but that's also dependent upon the future Congress not cutting the IRS budget as they have in the past. So, but assuming they get the $40 billion for taxpayer service and IT, that will be very helpful just for the taxpayer service experience. And we do have up to $1 trillion tax gap. The numbers vary, depends upon who's making the estimates. But as Dr. Harmelink said, increased enforcement is going to pay off. That historically has. For every dollar you spend, you bring in $10 in additional revenue. And those numbers vary too. But hopefully they will get some additional funding. The knock against it is we don't want the IRS auditor underneath your bed at the same time. So there's a trade-off there.
Oh, there's always a trade-off. Your article opens with an anecdote that many of our readers will be familiar with. It was a decision by the IRS to destroy about 30 million paper returns in March of last year. And time and again, your article will call out some of the inefficiencies associated with paper returns. I'm just wondering if you can imagine a future, and I don't know when this would be, where we sort of wean ourselves off of paper returns entirely. In other words, I'm talking about universal e-filing. Would something like that help eliminate some of these administrative problems?
E-filing would eliminate the paper-based problems, Robert, but some would refuse. Dr. Harmelink would agree with that. Dr. Harmelink, I think you still file on paper because you sort of have to, right?
Yeah, I do have to because I was hacked at one point.
So for identity theft, he's got to file by paper, but it would, the other problem is that we require a third-party software vendor right now to file your return, unless IRS developed that ability, which would be good if they did. And, there's precedent for it because Social Security does require direct deposit of returns, but of deposits. But tax returns are a little bit trickier.
Yeah, and I suppose not everyone has internet access, or not everyone can afford one of these third-party vendors to process it for them.
And then one other issue too, Robert, on that is even the IRS has about 300 forms that can't be e-filed right now.
That many? Wow.
Yeah,
well, that's a lot of
you just have a lot of complexity in the code. So maybe we could PDF them in the future. So hopefully we'll move more to the electronic filing, and we're at 90% on the individual returns, which is a pretty high number, but that still leaves you 20 million you got to process through the paper.
Another problem area for the IRS is their inability to handle the heavy volume of incoming telephone calls from taxpayers. I believe it was last year, there was an estimate that the agency received somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 million phone calls. And of course, they weren't able to answer most of them. Roughly 90%, I think, they couldn't pick up. How vital a function is the IRS dial-in service?
The phone service has historically been a problem for the IRS, but as you notice, it was made even worse during the pandemic. And to the degree that you have to call the IRS on some tax issues, but hopefully the IRS is moving with the funding to greater rev use. And they do have an IRS online account you can set up right now, which is pretty nice. So you set that up and then you can see your tax records back several years. They say 2 years, but it's actually a little bit more. See your payment history, and you can even respond to some IRS notices, but some still don't show up in that system. And they also have these voice bots where you call and you deal with the computer to extend your payment terms. And that works okay until you try to get penalty relief. And then you got to talk to an IRS agent. So we'll have to look at that. And also you can email the IRS or send the IRS a question in the past, but it was really hard to find. And they don't really like to give you a written answer on that.
Phil, your thoughts on the phone service? Is it something we can dispense with, or is it a necessary service?
I would be inclined to think that it's not a necessary service and probably should maybe get rid of it. But that's just my opinion.
All right, let's talk about the pandemic now. The COVID-19 pandemic presented many issues for the federal government in many ways. And of course, tax administration was not immune from any of that. As far as the IRS is concerned, they had a couple of tricky filing seasons there. But now, as we're looking forward, as we're approaching the 2023 filing season, which is going to be just around the corner, is it fair to say the agency is back to normal?
I don't think we're quite there yet. We did start this season with 20 million unprocessed returns. Now, that number varies upon which source you go to. And the latest I read was there was still about 10 million more returns. And hopefully they'll get it done, but the math is daunting to get all these returns, prior returns processed. Riddick is very hopeful we're on the right path. So hopefully by the end of the year, we'll start the 2023 filing season with the returns process.
Well, this certainly is a very important issue, and we read about this type of thing in the newspapers and things like that all the time. So people are aware of the issue and problem, I think.
You mentioned Commissioner Riddick. As you point out in your article, there's a member of Congress, I think his name is Bill Pascrell, a representative from New Jersey, who wants the commissioner removed from office. And I guess the point there is that he wants to send a message that the agency's backlog is unacceptable or something like that. And my question to you is, would that do any good? I'm just thinking Commissioner Riddick, eventually his term is going to end and they'll be replaced by someone else. And won't that future commissioner basically face the same problems that he faces? Your thoughts on that matter?
Riddick actually brought that up in the House committee meeting that this was likely his last term in office because it expires this fall.
I came on board almost 4 years ago, October 1, 2018. Knew a lot about the Internal Revenue Service, have obviously learned a lot about the Internal Revenue Service. And I might encourage you to invite me back when I'm no longer wearing the collar of a commissioner for an additional discussion, whether that's one-on-one or in a committee hearing.
But he truly has a thankless job. But I think he knew that going in because he has a long history with tax professionals. He's a tax lawyer. He's talked a lot before the AICPA tax committees, and he was active with IRS boards. And hopefully with the new commission, with the funding, things can get better, but you can still have the same problems in my view.
Yeah, Philip, do you agree? You think the IRS commissioner has a thankless job?
Well, yes, I think he has done a good job as far as I can tell, but it is a thankless job. And he certainly has experience and knowledge, and it'll be hard to replace somebody with that amount of knowledge and experience. So anyway, we'll just have to see what happens.
Very true. Your article describes a conversation that happened sort of behind closed doors between the commissioner and a member of Congress who's not identified. But as you relate that story, the lawmaker basically acknowledges the principal obstacle to funding the IRS better than we do. And it's that politicians worry that any vote in favor of enhanced IRS funding is going to come back and hurt them in the public opinion polls. And they all have to run for re-election. They all have to do fundraising and so forth. So what's the solution there? It's almost like you've touched on a cultural issue. And if we don't change it, I don't know how things are going to get better. Your thoughts on that?
You know, Senator Russell Long years ago said, don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the other fellow behind the tree. And that's definitely always been there with taxation. But I do think the Democrats in the House, on the House Oversight Committee, they sort of agree that taxpayer services needed better funding and the IT really needed better funding. So I think there is some agreement on that. Now, the degree of enforcement, as we've seen in the papers lately, very political issue there. But, you know, the IRS audit rates are very low, really abysmal at this point. So we do need probably a little bit more enforcement, and hopefully the IRS will get some sustained funding to bring in the agents are losing right now.
Philip, the last word.
I agree. You know, the more enforcement we can get, and if we can increase the audit rate, you know, I think there will get a lot of additional revenue.
There you have it. That's all the time we have for today. Again, the article is titled Pragmatic Realities of an Underfunded IRS. The authors are William VanDenburgh, Philip Harmelink, and Joshua Foster. You can find it in Tax Notes Federal through the attached link. And I want to thank our guests. It's a very fine article and well worth reading. Thank you for the discussion, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Want more like this? Subscribe for more tax videos. Special thanks to our executive producers, Jasper Smith and Paige Jones, and showrunner and video editor, Jordan Parrish.